Well, thank you. But let me say that I will be speaking with the perspective of somebody representing an international education union. So you won't be surprised when I talk a little bit about education. And I wanted to start to tell you that a couple of months ago, the Education Union of Japan celebrated its 70th anniversary, and I had the pleasure of taking part in the celebrations in Tokyo, and it occurred to me that the establishment of this union in 1947 had been the direct result of a constitution imposed on the country by the American forces immediately after the Second World War to help it become a democracy. And it was General MacArthur, I've been told, a conservative Republican, who had a hand in ensuring that the right to form trade unions was written into that constitution, a right that had not been recognized before in Japan. And I believe that he also established a legal basis for Japan's public school system. Now, then I thought about the irony. 70 years later, in MacArthur's home country, union rights were being restricted and the public school system vandalized by reckless politicians. I will resist the temptation of making unkind remarks about your president and his education secretary.
Go ahead.
Let me just say that I find Mr. Trump's America First approach and his admiration for people like Putin, Erdogan, and Duterte particularly scary. That's the word, I think. The other day I had an interesting conversation with the head of one of the United Nations agencies, and the person confided in me that the situation within the UN system was politically rudderless. Given the historic role of American leadership in the world, the disengagement and mixed signals only worsen that drift. Now, when the world gathered in September 2015 in New York to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals, and when it came together a couple of months later in Paris to agree on the climate change measures to be taken, I sensed a renewed optimism. It was not only a commitment toward building a sustainable future, but a future grounded in the vision of shared democratic values. Now, here we are today in the middle of a crisis, challenging the resilience of our public and democratic institutions. Crisis also, if you will, of half-truths and outright lies. Deceitfulness is today a global problem. Not only did a foreign power interfere in your elections, but apparently in several other elections as well. But the United States itself is also a major deception exporter. Cambridge Analytics, that company micro-targeted Facebook accounts for candidate Trump, as you know, but it also performed the same pro bono service for the Brexit campaign in the UK. Now listen, the day after the British people decided to leave the European Union, the trending question on Google UK was, what is the European Union? Through social networks, children and adults can create their own realities in bubbles where everybody agrees. And they may agree on hate and bigotry or become a launching pad for bullying. Even when it does not take a hostile form, one can proliferate groupings of people with near identical views. A study based on the World Values Survey recently published shows that in several consolidated democracies in Europe and in North America, support for democracy has declined. And particularly alarming is the fact that the authoritarian temptation was felt most by those born in or after 1980. In my country, the Netherlands, only a third of young people attach maximal importance to living in a democracy. In the United States, the figure is also around 30%. My question, shouldn't all alarm bells be ringing? Another disturbing development is the fading belief among politicians, including progressive politicians, including social democrats, that a free press, a robust public school system, a vibrant civil society, and an independent trade union movement are essential to democracy. We see public authorities in several Western democracies confuse isolated voices with representative institutions, and in some cases deliberately undermine their country's representative institutions, especially trade unions. The Minister of Education of Argentina told me a couple of weeks ago that he had 50,000 teachers as followers on Twitter. So why should I talk to the Education Union? One conversation would not concern me, but several of my member organizations, which are education unions in 170 countries, have informed us that their representative role is no longer being respected and that they are being replaced by people who represent nobody, or worse, act on behalf of private companies and vendors. But let me stop whining and cite an American president from the time when perception and competence were still important factors in American elections. Franklin Roosevelt, he said, democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. Therefore, the real safeguard of democracy is education. Now, Roosevelt meant America's public schools. And he must have meant that the people should be able to make an educated, responsible choice to distinguish fact from fiction and make distinctions between true political leadership and rebel-rousing. Imagine that this would be the standard by which we measure the success of our school systems. Citizens making responsible choices. International rankings would look a lot different. I suspect that some countries currently in the top 10 of the PISA ranking would drop to the bottom of the list. Now, I ask myself the same question that you, Louis, asked yesterday. Have we failed? It's a daring question. Let's reframe it. Are we still Roosevelt's safeguard of democracy? Or are we gradually becoming the safeguard of markets, shaping future consumers, rather than citizens of the future, active and critical citizens able to assert their rights while respecting the rights of others? Well, you tell me. I'm sure that our school systems are not as much focused on safeguarding democracy as they are on boosting our nation's economic performance, on transferring skills rather than imparting democratic values. What I'm also sure of is that in the past decades, teachers have lost much of their professional autonomy. The standardized testing frenzy is only one example of what keeps us from educating young people in the true sense of the word. The marketing and commercialization of education is another factor that may crush Roosevelt's vision. Allow me to stress that teachers are part of the glue that holds society together. Nation building, but also peace and democracy are essential mandates and functions for education. And this makes teachers very, very vulnerable. Sometimes they're squeezed between political groupings, they're caught between ethnic, linguistic, religious rivalries, or targeted by public authorities, like, for example, very recently in Turkey, where since the attempted military coup more than a year ago, thousands of teachers were fired, were dismissed. And at the beginning of this school year, we were shocked by the Turkish government's decision to toss out of the curriculum the teaching of evolution in science classes. And Turkey is no longer an exception. In Europe, where I thought that we shared democratic standards and the belief that teachers' professional freedom and space are essential to quality teaching and learning, there are jurisdictions today, such as Poland, such as Hungary, that are decreasing that space, that are limiting that freedom. For example, by imposing one particular history syllabus, glorifying disgraceful chapters of the national heritage, or even worse, have ideology creep into the curriculum. Let me also emphasize that we see our tasks in line with John Dewey's seminal text on democracy and education, where it is the role of the profession to ensure that students grow up to be critical thinking and informed citizens who make decisions based on fact and not on political ideology. And we take this responsibility even more seriously in the face of rising trends in some countries, not only the United States, to undermine the free press. I strongly believe that media literacy and internet literacy should become a global priority of the teaching profession to contain fake news and burst propaganda bubbles. Therefore, we must make it perfectly clear that we, teachers, have the right to use our professional discretion to interrogate and to reject curricular directives that defy facts, that falsify history, or lead to xenophobia and hate, whether that means rejecting curricula written by the non-renewable fuel industry about clean coal, or by big tobacco about good health, or by misguided racists writing history books. There is a professional and ethical responsibility that outweighs the authority of education employers, or even of governments, like the government of Turkey, like the government of Poland, like the government of Hungary and others, where they have more or less abdicated democracy and human rights. This is, I believe, what society expects of our profession and what we expect of each other. Beyond left and right, there is true and false, and it is our responsibility to prepare future generations to understand the difference. For us, the fight for democracy is on two fronts, in the community and in our schools. I believe that our public school systems can play a decisive role in overcoming the crisis of democracy. But this requires that we strengthen the teaching profession globally and help education unions across all continents to fight for a broad curriculum, including citizenship education, and again for teachers' professional autonomy, enabling educators to carry out their core duty, which is to impart democratic and human rights values and to foster active future citizenship. As President Abraham Lincoln said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. And I think that would be a wonderful bumper sticker. Thank you.